when I heard those stories, I've got a very, very highly trained and perceptive journalistic radar. And when I was hearing those stories, I was like, that story about the perfect tuba, oh my, I never forgot it.
Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining me on the Gift of Need podcast. I'm Jude Trang. I'm an author, and I'm also an observer for many years of human need in our society and how it shapes our behavior with our relationships personally and as a society as a whole. And it's born from my belief that our needs are not burdens, but they are opportunities and gifts. And my guest today is Sam Quinones, New York Times bestselling author and National Book Critics Award finalist. And we're going to be talking about his latest book, again, The Perfect Tuba. So this is part 2. Hi, Sam.
Thank you.
So Sam gave his background in the last previous podcast, so you can listen to that and catch up on his other books and stuff. Where we're going to go today with this podcast is I want to ask Sam, how the heck did you come up with this title, The Perfect Tuba? So you explained about the fact that you've been taking notes and interviewing people about tubas for a long time, but where does the perfect tuba come into this?
One of the stories that kept me going, even though I was not going to write anything about tuba players, just kept me interviewing tuba players for reasons I could not have told you at the time, was one story that I heard talking with one of those players, as I mentioned before, a guy named Bob Carpenter, who's a Orlando Symphony tuba player and engineer. And I just called him out of the blue. You know, like it was a tuba. Who else can I talk to? This guy gave me Bob's number. Can't remember who did. And I called him and he says, well, perhaps I gave you because have you heard of the mystical, legendary York tubas? And I was like, I have not.
Neither have I.
No, of course. But it turns out that in all the history of human innovation, we have been able to only build only two perfect tubas, and they are both built they're owned by the Chicago Symphony, built by the York Instrument Company in Grand Rapids, Michigan, that went out of business in the 70s, but really its great years were before the World War II, when it was really the premier tuba maker probably in the world, with one of the greatest.
What was the big deal about tubas in the,
because the
tubas in history that you don't really know about them, right? I mean, they weren't really around back like.
No, they're very young instrument. They're the youngest brass instrument in the symphony. These tubas though were renowned for a couple of reasons. One, they seemed to enhance the entire symphony when you played them more than any other tuba. So everybody sounded better when this tuba was played. Now, it also has to do, there's two of them. Both of them eventually were purchased by the guy who made them into the holy grail instruments that they became, a guy named Arnold Jacobs, who was the symphony's tuba player and part of this brass section that in classical music world was renowned worldwide. The brass section of the Chicago Symphony was, just amazing and was for decades. It was populated by 5 guys. All of them were absolute virtuosos. But at the bottom was Arnold Jacobs with this enormous York tuba that just seemed to make everybody sound better. And what's more, tuba players were looking for superheroes at this time, right? It was tubas were like relegated. They were pushed off to the side. And there was this whole thing, as I spoke of before, tuba Woodstock, where everyone says, you know what, we need to be considered with more respect. We need to work harder at our instruments, and we need to become true virtuoso players. And as part of that, they had someone to look up to who was Arnold Jacobs. And Arnold Jacobs playing these eventually he bought both of these tubas made by the York Instrument Company. And but it was also partly it was that Arnold Jacobs talked about these tubas as if they were like almost magical, like the holy grail of tubas. There's only two of them. Nine companies have tried to replicate these two tubas and always come close, but not perfect. In fact, it's probably not possible to perfectly replicate. Just as I don't think they've replicated a Stradivarius violin ever. I think the same is true of these tubas. But it was these two tubas were at a time when tuba players were coming into their own, and they had no heroes. And Arnold Jacobs kind of became that hero. He was also a magnificent, legendary music instructor, not just for tubas, but for all wind instruments. But it was, and so that's kind of what turned these two tubas into these amazing things. On the other hand, it's also true that their sound is unparalleled. And this is from many people who have played them and know far more about the nuances of tuba sound than I would ever know, of course, But it became kind of this, first of all, when I heard those stories, I've got a very, very highly trained and perceptive journalistic radar. And when I was hearing those stories, I was like, that story about the perfect tuba, oh my, I never forgot it. For 12 years, it was always way back here. If I ever do a story, it's going to be a book. It's going to be called The Perfect Tuba. And a major thread will be how these two guys in Orlando, Bob Carpenter and a guy named Tom Treese, were just engineers who set out to see if they could possibly replicate the two York tubas that 9 companies had tried to replicate and not really come exactly close to it or perfect to it. And so it became there. I won't tell you how it ends, but your listeners, how it ends. But it's this. These guys are on their own. They don't have any research and development budget from some major music corporation. They're just trying to figure it out on their own. How can we replicate a perfect tuba? Because by now, those tubas are almost 100 years old, right. and they may not. And they've been patched and they've been through the wars, been played almost every day. So, to me, the perfect tuba was what kept me going. That's why I kept on interviewing people. Like, one day I want to write about the perfect tuba. So I thought it'd be like some magazine story. What's that? Have you seen them? What? Oh, I've seen them. And I put one of them on my lap. And it's like, if you can imagine having a linebacker sit on your lap, that's what it feels like. It's like enormous. And I'm 6 foot. And even so, it was like huge. And then I was allowed to try to play one of them. And it felt to me like almost a life-threatening attempt, because it's so much air that you have to produce. And so what I ended up producing was a sound that sounds very much like your stomach when it growls. I had not had enough to eat. That's what I produced. It was embarrassing. And of course, I felt bad because there's probably 100 tuba players anywhere you go who would give their eye teeth to be playing that tuba instead of me, who has zero. I don't play the tuba. I was never in marching band. That's not the point of the book. I just, but it was this remarkable thing. And yes, I just remember feeling like unbelievably big. Like, how would I fill all those tubes? That's 16, I believe it's 16 or 18 feet of tubes, all bent every which way, But how am I supposed to fill all this with, and how do you keep on filling it with air? I don't know, So anyway, that was my one experience. That was strange, because the one time I've actually been able to play the one time I've actually attempted to play the tuba, it was on one of these like mythical instruments that all these tuba players talk about in these most hallowed terms, Oh, that's great. Well, so that got you
going and moving forward. And you have really tied in some great other aspects of the Perfect Tuba, as we talked about in the last one. And yeah, I learned a lot about the tuba that I'd never knew before. And I thought about so it's the sousaphone. Is that the one that the marching bands play?
Marching band tuba, yeah.
So of
Right.
course they're not holding that linebacker because you couldn't walk, but I mean they're still big instruments. And the way in which, like, you think about how the desire that the musicians, that this caused them to kind of reach for,
Yeah.
when you think about, because like we said, you don't think about the tuba. He's way in the back of the orchestra and he makes that nice boom boom, and that's kind of it. But it becoming something that came kind of out of the background gave a whole generation or generations of people something to work towards and to look forward to, and bring it. And I have not YouTubed the flight of the bumblebees on the tuba yet. I meant to before we talked, but I can't imagine it. You can't imagine somebody being able to do that,
Right. One of the guy's stories that I really liked was, or it was a poignant story, was a story of Jared Trevino, who was the best tuba player of his generation down in Rio Grande Valley, in a little town called Harlingen down there. And he was mightily bullied, and the tuba became kind of the extreme story of what the tuba frequently means to a lot of kids, which is to find themselves, frequently kids in band. Again, they're not athletic. They're like sometimes at the bottom of the social pecking order in high school. You don't play the tuba on your own. You play it through marching band, and so it's a social instrument, except for that a lot of the kids, this guy was just pitilessly bullied, JR was. And so he came to the tuba. The tuba became his solace. It became the way, first of all, he showed himself that he was not what other people said he was, which was a loser and a retard and all this very, very bitter stuff. He found in himself, through the tuba, these abilities that everyone else said he didn't possess. And that is an amazing thing. And so he became good because he never came to the tuba kicking and screaming. He came to it always with love, right? Oh, I want to play the tuba. He would play it during his lunch hour, and this kind of thing. And so he developed skills that nobody in the entire Rio Grande Valley possessed when it came to the tuba. And he was the best and was the first chair and all that. And what I liked about it was, first of all, that the tuba became almost his medicine. But then also, I have to say this, as he got older, he kind of faded away. He couldn't find, he was kind of like terrified of people because of how he'd been treated. And so that kept him in Harlingen, even though they'd been treated very badly in that town, because he didn't want to venture out into another town where he didn't know anybody, and so he stayed. He didn't get the instruction that he needed, and a lot of things happened. But in the end, I found him to be remarkably articulate and honest about what had happened to him. Like the tuba had stood in for too much in his life, he came to believe. Like it was there. It was my medicine. It was my friend, my best friend. So how we several times referred to it, but maybe it shouldn't have been. You know what I mean? I have to say that when I began to finally focus on the stories of tuba players, it was the poignancy that really took me. There was wonderful, interesting things, but what really blew me away sometimes was like people telling me, like just these beautiful moments that they had experienced, or in the case of JR, he just, I think I probably needed other things, but the tuba was all I had, and I didn't dare give it up. didn't, when he was in high school and college and so on. And so it was this wonderful period. It was not, all these stories are not always beautiful.
Well,
There's some power, there's some poignancy to them that can be sometimes sad.
well, and that's what makes you think, what would his life have been like if he hadn't had that? Somebody that withdrawn and that bullied and that kind of stuff, he could have had a terrible life. And so,
I don't know. Yes, you are 100% correct. And he was, you know, yeah, he's such an interesting man. I just loved. I talked to him on the phone, on Zoom, that kind of thing, and then I went down twice to meet him down in Harlingen, and it was just profound talking with the guy, because he was 42 by then, and he had time to look back on his life, and think about what the tuba had meant, both to his feeling of self-esteem, which was profound, but then also that maybe the tuba had been taken up too much in his life, and maybe that was not okay. That maybe he had anyway. People had told me this guy is an idiot savant, which I take to mean he's good at one thing and everything else he's bad at, and he can't really speak well. This was not true. I'm not sure how you would typify J.R. Trevino, but he was one of the most articulate people, smart people, well-versed, well traveled in his mind. He had records of, the New York Philharmonic and the Chicago Philharmonic, the Symphony Orchestra and all this. This in Harlingen, Texas, the ranching town right in the middle of southern Texas, right? And he was just, anyway, the story of J.R. Trevino is one of those that makes me like awed to be a reporter. Like, I can't believe I had the good fortune to have stumbled on this man's story, and then have him be willing to tell it with such articulation and such thought.
That's so neat. I mean, that's your investigative reporter, ability and gifting that I've always admired. And because in the last podcast, we talked about the importance of marching bands and how the tuba was more than just, it's not a solo instrument. I mean, it can play solos, but, and well, I'm going to give you a story, and then I'm going to ask you to tell me what you think about the tuba as far as it around the world. Well, maybe let's start there. Do you think that with this kind of renaissance, or this new wave of finding the tuba as a more prominent instrument in the Second World War and beyond time, was that just limited to America, or did it have an influence around the world?
No. I think what you're finding is that the tuba, wherever there's classical symphonies, and actually, to be honest, wherever there is just municipal marching bands or whatever, Italy or Oaxaca or Germany, I think you are finding tuba players becoming much, much better. The horns that they are given to play now are light years better than they were, say, 50 years ago. They're much, much improved. And I would say that some of the greatest, there are soloists. I can think of 3 or 4 who are not American. In fact, most of them seem to be not American, frankly. The Oystein Badsvik is probably the best known, and he's Norwegian. Sergio Carolino is Portuguese. And these are guys who, first of all, they have a very iconoclastic approach to the tuba. They take all kinds of musical influences, right? It's not just, I'm going to play this kind of thing. It's all kinds of things thrown together. And so I think the tuba, as it has become better made, it's not perfect. The search for the perfect tuba never achieved perfection, but the tuba along the way got better, for sure. It was never perfect, but it did get much, much better, which is a little bit like the way you approach almost everything in human life, right? It's the small steps are the most important ones. And eventually you get better. You get better. This is also the way drug addiction recovery works. It's a small step kind of thing, so you can see in the tuba a lot of different parallels in life. But I would say that most countries now, I mean, and certainly in Europe, have and the many tuba players, many great tuba players, and Germany for sure, and all. And then Japan too. Japan has a ton of amazing tuba players.
So interesting. So my dad's family is from an island called Ischia in the Bay of Naples, and where my grandparents came from after World War I. And we travel there fairly frequently, and all of my family, my dad's family, is all still there. And this last time when John and I were there, we were in a shop, and then, oh, I don't know, it was like one day, it was on the weekend, and all of a sudden we hear the band, and you go out,
Right.
and here's this marching band and we're kind of going, then when they stopped, I said, is there something special happening? It wasn't they weren't doing a saint parade like
Yeah.
they do. No, they were just there. And it was people from young people, I'm sure, younger than even high school age, all the way to the nunus, the nonos, and the older guys. And there they were. And everybody came out of the shops, watched them,
Right.
cheered for them, at every place along this via that they were going. And the other thing, we have friends in Malaga, Spain, and they're American and Egyptian. And the mom is a friend of our daughter's. And so they've got 3 teenagers, and I cannot remember, I should have found this out or reminded myself before we started this, but she got into playing in a band that is just drums. And it's all these different kind of drums, and they march, and so she has it on a strap on her thing. And when we saw her, I think 2 years ago, she was just starting out, and she said, I really like it. And somebody that she knew had suggested a friend. Well, now she's going to Madrid and their band is playing. But what I've noticed from that, what I notice all the time whether we're with my husband's family in Norway or my family in Italy, other places, is their sense of community. I don't
Right.
think they ever lost what we lost when we went through the freedom hippie era of the 60s and 70s. And I think a big part of it, I mean, we know that music is the language of that is around the world. Music is what touches us. And so I think that was the band part and the music. People are just drawn to it, and it helps tie community together in a way.
I think you're right that I think we had a time when there was very common for towns to have their own brass bands. John Philip Sousa in the 20s, in just after World War I, I'm sorry, helped create that, traveled around the Music Man. He would travel around and everybody get lessons now and everybody play and that kind of thing. And then I think it probably was with rock and roll that a lot of that died. It was viewed as very corny and old fashioned.
Yep.
But one of the places that is really, really big into this is a couple places in Mexico. Brought over them. These were European instruments brought over by beermeisters coming to Mexico from Germany, Bavaria, Bohemia, different places. And so now you have in many parts of the country, but certainly in the state of Oaxaca, you have enormous focus on community bands. And they're playing, again, European instruments. These are indigenous areas, but they're playing European instruments, frequently European music. And your town is, I wrote about this, I know about this because in my first book, I wrote about the other thing that each of these towns values, and that is basketball, their local basketball team, and the basketball tournament that they hold each annual fiesta. But the way, again, like with band, the way kids mostly rise to prominence, social prominence in a lot of these Oaxacan towns is by playing in the band, because the band is just so much larger than the basketball team could ever be. You're talking about 30, 40 kids sometimes. A lot of that has been exported now as people, Oaxacans have migrated, and many, many, many of them live in LA. LA, the West Side, over by Santa Monica, Venice, places like that. It's just wall to wall Oaxacans frequently, and there are tons of bands, and there's also a lot of basketball teams. Oaxacan basketball teams, which is amazing because Oaxacans are short. They're like rare to find a 5'10" Oaxacan, at least migrant. Maybe their kids are much taller, but they're not.
Right.
And but you get this feeling of, yes, they bring the band with them. It makes people feel like part of that. They're not in some extraordinarily foreign place, which they are, where they don't speak the language, where they frequently don't have documentation allowing them to legally be in the country. Here you've got the band and the basketball team to some degree, that is just kind of like this, this wonderful thing of point of pride for whatever. And there's now music schools, Oaxacan music schools. There's at least 2 that I'm aware of in Los Angeles to teach kids coming up, because before you would learn just by people being in the same village, in the same small area, and you would learn the clarinet from this old guy who'd been playing the clarinet for 25 years. You'd learn from him, but now that's not possible really in LA. So they have these schools. It's a remarkable thing, but it also shows you that band, because of its egalitarianness, because of its wide encompassing sense, that's what gives it its power when it comes to creating community, because it accepts everybody who's just willing to learn and wants to work. You don't really have to have musical talent. You have to talent, as most music teachers would tell you, and certainly I believe this when it comes to writing, talent is overrated. It's really about working at what you're trying to do. You may never become the greatest at your instrument or greatest writer, but you move forward. You can get much better. And you can have it be part of your life and add to the community. And I think that's in the Oaxacan case. There's no doubt. If you go to LA, you can see these bands at times playing, and I just think that's what allows band to have this transformative effect. That's what allows band to be the antidote that I saw it to these books right here about opioids, OxyContin and heroin and fentanyl and meth, and the very addictive nature of so much of what we're force-fed in this country, it seems to me, is, band is an antidote to that. Why? Because what it really requires is the basic stuff, to get back to the basic stuff: focus, hard work, postponed gratification, and especially in this time of such crippling isolation, it requires collaboration with others, and as much as you may not like the people that you have to collaborate with, it's fine. You got to learn to do that. And I think that is really what is beautiful. That's what I learned from writing the Perfect Tuba, right? I learned that band is one of these powerful, powerful influences, and we've ignored it. We want to talk about the athletes on the field, right, and all that they're learning about life lessons. I think the life lessons are being lived by the kids up in the bleachers, playing for those down on the field.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right, Sam, and I think our time is coming to an end again. It just goes so quick when we're talking. We could talk all night. There's so many fun aspects about this, and
yeah, it's true. There's a lot there.
Yeah, it is. I mean, when you think about the things that, isn't that what we want teach our children, is
100%.
To work hard, start out. You don't have to be. And I think there is something about that. I had a discussion with somebody about that thing that says you can be anything you want. Well, no, a lot of us cannot be anything we want. When you think of, being the next, superstar in this thing, or superstar athletes or music, whatever, but you can be, and you can be through hard work and determination. You can be good at something that gives you fulfillment and a sense of pride. And that's something that all the stardom in the world I mean, they'll all tell you it's just a chain around their neck. That's not, they have to overcome all of that baggage. It's the knowing that you've done something, and not only for yourself, but I think, again, this is this individualistic mentality that we have, especially in the West, that has eroded community. I think the Perfect Tuba is the perfect antidote to it. So
Right.
thank you again, Sam.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Jude. Thanks so much for your interest in my work. It's very, very kind of you. I still appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you. So, folks, get a copy of the Perfect Tuba. It's great, and sit down and read it. Yes, yes. And in speaking about the needs that we all have for significance and fulfillment in our lives, that's this area that I'm so interested in, and so convinced that they can become gifts not just to ourselves, but to the community and the people around us. And so I think it brings joy and fulfillment to all of us. So, all right, well, you can check out all of Sam's work by going to samquinones.substack.com. It'll be in the show notes. The great music you're hearing is written and performed by Gabe Kubanda at Kubanda Music. You can find him on any streaming service. The engineer is Ray Engineering. You can find him at 3rd Street Productions in Tucson, Arizona. And please consider following and subscribing to the podcast and to my Substack newsletter. It's all free. Leave a comment or review. I'd love it. Thank you. Bye.
See ya.